I cannot live without these brushes. They save me all the time, and I'm going to tell you all about them in today's video. And today's video is part 2 of a 3-part series that we started last week, where we talked about values, lights, mediums, and darks. And we talked about how values do all the hard work in a painting and color steals the glory. And we ended last week talking about how you can get different values with your watercolors by adjusting your paint to water ratio. This week, we're going to start off talking about another way you can build up your values from light to dark in watercolor. Remember, the white of the paper is your white, and then you paint your lights, then your mediums, and then your darks. So we're going to talk more about that, and then we're going to jump into the fun stuff. We're going to talk about how to fix watercolor. Watercolor is so fixable. It is a complete myth that watercolor is not fixable. You just have to use the right supplies with a few little tricks, and you can fix almost anything. You can fix watercolor when it's wet. You can fix watercolor when it's dry, and everything in between. So I'm going to give you a lot of fixing techniques this week. And also stay tuned for part 3 of this series, where I will share some vital information about how to get your paintings out of the ugly stage. And what is the ugly stage anyway? It's a real thing. It scares beginners. It's a bully, and I'm not putting up with it anymore. So we're going to talk about that, but that'll be in the next video next week. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. But first, my name is Rachel Parker Varner, and I like to teach not just the how, but the why of watercolor, so you move along your painting journey a lot faster. Remember to check out my description. I have tons of free stuff. I've got links to supplies, free tutorials, lots of good stuff linked in my description, and also in my comments I will put a list of videos that you can go watch after you're done with this one for even more aha moments. So be sure to check that out. At the end of this video, I will tell you more about my paid options, but for now, let me tell you a little bit about my free communities. There are 3 ways you can join my community. You can join right here on YouTube now. It's brand new. It's on the community tab. It's on the app. It's not on desktop or your laptops or your computers yet. You have to be on a smart device using the app. And you can go to my community tab on my channel, and you can share your paintings there. You can join my Patreon for free, where you can also post your paintings on my chat section. You can also join my free Facebook group, where you can post your paintings, and if you ask for help with your painting, we will give it to you. Or if you just need support, if you're a beginner, I highly recommend that you post your paintings, because we will be so encouraging. And sometimes, as a beginner especially, you just need that extra little encouragement. So be sure to join a community for that extra support. It has helped me throughout my watercolor journey and my career. I could not have done it without the communities that I join and the communities that I'm a part of. But let's jump into this tutorial, where we will start with a layering technique to build up your values, and then we'll get into fixing techniques. Here we go. Okay, so one way to get your lights, mediums, and darks and your values is by controlling your paint to water ratio, but maybe that's too complicated for you still. So another way you can do it is by layering paint layers. And a lot of watercolorists, even super advanced watercolor artists, use this technique a lot, and it's beautiful. It leads to beautiful results. And in fact, that's how I painted my beginner boss tutorial, where I used mostly just wet on dry techniques. You paint a layer of paint, let it dry. Assess. Does it need to be darker? Does it need to be more orange or cool or warm? Whatever you assess, whatever you decide, you can do another layer on top of that after you let the first layer completely dry. Think in terms of when you paint something with watercolor and you let it completely dry, it sets the paint into the paper. And so after it's completely dry, if you re-wet that area, it won't move very much. Now, if you used really thick paint, then that tends to reactivate more easily. But for the good of the point of this technique, You can paint wet on dry, let it dry completely, look at it, see if it needs to be adjusted in any way. Because remember, with watercolor, it's transparent. So with each successive layer that you build on top, it's like painting with saran wrap. So if you put a layer of yellow, then you decide, oh, it needs to be more green, you can let that dry and then add blue. And so the yellow will shine up through the blue and make green. So it's like painting with saran wrap using wet on dry techniques layered on top of each other with complete drying in between those steps. So if you want to learn that technique, I use that technique a lot in my beginner boss tutorial, and I used that a lot in this beginner sailboat tutorial. So with this wet on dry technique, you can accomplish 3 things. You can build up color with different layers because all the layers affect each other. You can build up texture. Often I paint large areas of color, let it dry, and then paint texture on top of that for cat fur, for example, or tree foliage texture. You can paint a layer of texture at the very end of a painting process. So you can build up color, texture, and you can darken values. The more layers you put, of course, the darker that passage is going to become using wet on dry layers. I do have a whole video also about controlling your water because you don't want puddles in general, and you don't want too drippy a brush, and you want to blot your heel. So for my very popular video that I named Stop, Don't Abandon Watercolor, I talked about how to control your water quite a bit. So be sure, if you are a beginner and you haven't watched my Stop, Don't Abandon Watercolor video, it has 10 tips in it that people really responded well and said it really helped them. They had a lot of aha moments from that video too as a beginner. So be sure to check out that video. I will link it in the comments with the other ones. So in conclusion of that very long-winded explanation of this one tip is don't worry about mixing your exact colors. Don't worry about that. Worry about getting your values right. Worry about having a good design with good values so that everything looks really beautiful. For example, if you're painting a white dog or a white flower, have a dark background. If you're painting a dark dog or a dark house or a dark whatever, have a light background. So you use contrast, and that's all about values. So again, values save the day. When you're painting different subjects, make sure you have contrast and values between the main subject and whatever is behind them so that they show up. If you have a dark dog on a dark background, you're not gonna be able to see the dog, and that's all about values. You can paint a black dog blue. In fact, I did that with Sam the Tuxedo tutorial. He's got a lot of black passages in his fur, but I use tons of colors to have fun with color, because as Richard McKinley used to say, values do all the hard work in a painting, but color steals the show. And my Sam the Tuxedo painting really shows that point, really drives that point home, because I painted a lot of the black fur in Sam, who is a black and white cat, with blues and greens and purples. And as long as those values were dark, they read as dark fur, as black fur. And I just put a little bit of black here and there to tell that story of black fur, but it was mostly colors. Another tricky thing to painting with watercolor is water control. There's water in your brush. There's water on your palette. There's water on your paper. A really powerful video that I did is called the Watercolor Clock. And Joseph Zbukvich came up with this idea in his beautiful book that is no longer really in print. But in this book, he talks about the watercolor clock. All right, let's take a look at the watercolor clock. That's probably the easiest way for you to kind of understand where this is going. And it's really amazing, I think. And especially for people who are new to watercolor, they may not realize all the different variations you can get, both in how much water you have on your paper and how much water you have mixed into your paint. So on this side, it's looking at how wet your paper is. Your paper can be wet, where you just applied a bunch of water, not puddling. You almost never want puddling, but wet. We often call this glistening. So when you move your paper, you can see it glisten. The water is sitting on top of your paper. It hasn't soaked in. As it soaks in, we move up the clock and we go to moist, where maybe your paper starts to buckle. The water starts to soak into your paper.
And when you paint on wet paper, your paint is going to bloom out more. When you paint on moist paper, it's going to bloom out a little less, but still be soft. When you paint on damp paper, which is very buckling and maybe cool to the touch, and you paint on this kind of paper with different paint consistencies, you'll get a lot different effects. This is actually a stage where you can get cauliflowers. And so there's a lot to know about this one stage in paper moisture level. If you go in on damp paper and your brush is too drippy, you can get what are called cauliflowers. But if you go in with thicker paint, like say cream consistency or butter consistency, thicker paint, you can get beautiful, soft, but very controlled lines and edges and small details. Think, for example, if you're painting the eyeliner of a cat, you want it to look soft, but obviously it has to be very controlled. I love to paint cat eyeliner on damp paper with cream or butter consistency paint. Okay, so, and then the driest, of course, is bone dry, which this is where you use your dry brush techniques. This is where you use your paint to create jewelry a lot of times, where you're painting tiny little details. Again, like for a cat, just for an example, say the pupils in the eye, or for a painting on of a landscape, it would be maybe something that has definite boundaries like the trunk of a tree. Okay, and then let's look at this side. Now we have different consistencies of paint to water ratios. So tea is very watery. When you tilt up your palette with tea consistency paint, it drips readily. Coffee drips, but slower. Milk will still drip slowly, but it might bead a bit. Cream consistency beads. And then butter is almost sticky. It has very little water added to it. So when you paint on butter, if you paint with butter consistency paint, it gives you the full strength of that color and the full darkness. As dark as that color will go, that's what butter will give you. With cream consistency, that's also usually going to be the full strength of that color. Milk, you're starting to get into the lighter variations. When you paint with milk consistency paint, it can have a beautiful effect. It can be very rich, but also have that fluid watercolor look because it does have quite a bit of water added to it. Coffee will dry a little bit lighter than milk, and tea will dry the lightest of all. And so then you look at this in terms of pairing these. So say you have paint on moist paper with tea consistency paint. You'll get soft blossoms, like soft clouds on maybe a misty day. And then say you paint on dry paper with cream consistency paint. That is going to give you perhaps dry brush effects, or it's going to give you super dark, very controlled marks. So depending on how much water you've got mixed into your paint paired with how much water is on your paper will give you wildly different results. And so this kind of blasts open the world of possibilities with watercolor. Think of all the different variations you can create with all these components, and it will empower you as an artist to be able to get so many different looks to your marks, which is crucial to making an aesthetically pleasing painting, because you want to have some marks that are softer and lighter and some that are dark and striking and hard edged and everything in between. And so understanding how watercolor works through this watercolor clock, I think will be very empowering to you. It's a great way to think in terms of how watercolor works.
Let's go over some basic fixing techniques. There's lots of different ways to fix watercolor. If you want to set yourself up for being able to fix your watercolors best, you want to use non-staining paint and good paper, like Arch Cold Press, which will allow you to scrub and erase. But even if you can't do that, let's look at a few fixing techniques that you can use when you get yourself in a bit of a jam. Here we go. All right, let's go over some fixing techniques. And to set yourself up for success, to be able to fix your watercolors, it will help so much if you use the right art supplies in the first place. For example, this is cobalt blue. What if I didn't know this is a non-staining paint? Non-staining paints are much more fixable than staining paints. Like a classic staining, very staining paint is the phthalo blues and greens. Lots of reds, and a lot of greens seem to be very staining too. So if you want to check and see if your paints that you already own are non-staining, paint a swatch like this. The thicker paint, like painted with cream consistency, is easier to lift than tea consistency, because it makes sense that this paint has soaked into the paper because it had more water in it. And this sits on top of the paper more because it had less water, so it didn't soak into the paper as much. So this will be easier to lift than this. So I'm just going to get a stiff brush, and that's relative, but this is just stiffer than a watercolor brush. This is an angled shader that is a acrylic painting brush. You can also use an eradicator, which is made for scrubbing and lifting and softening. Or you could use, if your paper is strong enough, which this is Canson XL watercolor student grade paper, so it's not going to take a lot of scrubbing. So you can use stiff scrubbers on papers like Arche. This is Arche, and we're going to look at how this takes more fixing than this paper will. But let's check and see if this is non-staining. So this is perfectly dry. It has to be perfectly dry. I'm going to get, and I'm working on cream consistency, dried paint, getting my scrubber. This is a stiff scrubber. Let me not use that on this paper. Not that it matters, because this was a demonstration. Anyway, I'll get my eradicator, which is a soft scrubber. And look how easy that is to lift. Let's see if we can lift the tea consistency. If this was Arche, oh yeah, it even lifts on the tea consistency swatch, but that's not always the case. So this, we can see, is a non-staining paint because it lifted so easily. Better papers take more rigorous scrubbing and fixing techniques and more layers and more water, but you can accomplish a lot on student grade paper, and I do recommend that you get a nice student grade paper that is cheaper, that you can get miles on the brush. And I have some decent paintings in this sketchbook, and I just couldn't do as many fixing techniques, and I couldn't use as many watery layers because the paper would break down faster. And I couldn't use as many fixing techniques, but I still was able to accomplish quite a few nice paintings on this student grade paper. It even does my fur out technique. If you haven't seen my fluff out technique with lamp black, be sure to check out my chick tutorial that I made many years ago now, to get this fluffy, wet and wet, soft, poofy look for chicks and dandelions and cats, long-haired cats. But anyway, let's do some fixing techniques. So let's make some mistakes and I'll show you how to fix them. So you can fix watercolor when it's still wet. You can fix watercolor when it's still dry. So let's look at some wet fixing techniques. So you're painting along, right? I'm going to get about milk consistency paint. Say I didn't like that mark for whatever reason. What you do is you can add water to it. Now I have clear water. I'm going to add water to that, and then I can blot it up and I can get it almost completely clean back to the paper. So that's one way that you can fix watercolor when it's still wet. Another thing that I noticed the other day, I was painting two colors next to each other. So I painted some color and then I got really too watery red that I wanted to drop into the blue like this, and it bloomed out like that. And I was like, oh, that's not good. So what I was able to do is take my brush, wring it out, and that's a thirsty brush, and I was able to pick up some of that red and proceed and try again while my paper was still wet. Okay. As your painting progresses, your paper will start setting up and drying. And then it's hard to do fixing techniques until it's completely dry. So we're going to let this completely dry. And I'm also, for example's sake, I'm going to paint a similar mark on here so I can show you how you can use a stiff scrubber on Arches. This is Arches cold press paper. What if you make a mark like this and that's too dark? Dip your brush immediately in the water and you can add more water right to the page. What if it's too puddly? You don't want that much of a puddle. You can squeeze out your brush and soak up some of that puddle. You can also tilt your paper up like this and then soak up the puddle down here so that you don't have too much of a puddle. If you leave puddles in your watercolors, they will create blooms possibly where you don't want them. I personally like blooms, and they rarely are a problem in my style because I'm really loose and impressionistic, but some people don't want those blooms in their paintings. All right, I'm going to paint some red. I'm going to try to let that set up and then create a bloom, and we can look at how to fix a bloom if you want to. But it's hard to create a watercolor bloom when this is still quite wet, so I've got to let it set up. So I've got to wait. This might actually bloom, although cobalt blue doesn't bloom very well, but let me try to create a bloom. So this is half dry, and look, a cauliflower is forming. What if you don't want a cauliflower there? Well, with Arches, it's actually quite easy. You can let this completely dry and then scrub over it to even it out. But if you try to fix it while it's half dry, you'll just make it worse. It's too late. So we've got to let that cauliflower dry, and then I'll show you how you can fix that on Arches anyway. Let's see if this is set up enough to create a bloom. It's half dry. So this is what we call buckling stage, when your paint starts to absorb into the paper. And if you go in with too drippy of paint, like say I go in with a really drippy, watery brush of cobalt, see, it's still puddling, so it's not in the buckling stage yet. So I didn't get a cauliflower there. Let's try it over here. Let's do it with red on the blue. These still might be too wet, but see how when I push down on them, especially this one right here, let's see if we can get a cauliflower. It might still be too wet. And cobalt doesn't, I'm surprised I got this good of a cauliflower on this one. Another thing I want to show you guys is, what if you're painting along and you really want a soft edge, but you're painting wet on dry, and you, say you're painting a tree, you know, like let's paint a really fast, silly tree. And let's add some color variety so it's a pretty tree. You know, drop in a few different colors, but it just looks so stiff, you know, and you don't want it to look that stiff. Let's put in okay, say you have that tree, but it looks so stiff and hard-edged. What's a fix? A really good sprayer is to have a misting sprayer, but you can spray some of the edges. You can also do this with fur. And see, this made a weird mark, so I can just blot it back up. You can also blot at edges. you can also go in with a clean, damp, thirsty brush. This is damp. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it, just a little water, and you can run it along your edges, and that'll soften your edges too. So you have a softer, more romantic looking tree. So that's a way to soften up edges on fur, on trees. That's why I tell my Patreon students, watch my tutorials, because the techniques that I teach, you can use whether you're painting a tree or a cat. They all relate to each other. All right, this is starting to really buckle. Let's see if we can get another cauliflower. Let's see. I want to create cauliflowers so I can show you how to fix them. But usually what you have to do is let them dry. All right, I'm going to let these dry a little, and then we can try to fix the cauliflowers. You can also use a hair dryer if you are impatient. Okay, I used a hair dryer to speed up the process a little bit. And so now let's see what we can do to fix this cauliflower. And so often the answer in watercolor is add water. Like when we got a blob that we didn't like, add water, blot it up. When we didn't like hard edges, in some way we added water. If we get a too dark, heavy mark like this, add water. And it fixes so many problems to just add water. So let's get a drippy brush. This is very drippy, and so and this is very dry, bone dry. This has to be bone dry for this to really work. I'm going to get this whole area wet, and then I'm just going to massage it. Okay, and see if we can at least make this cauliflower a little less conspicuous, right? So already my cauliflower is softening. This is on good paper though, remember? And we'll see how the student grade paper does. Then if you want to smooth it out even more, you can get a little bit of tea consistency blue and just almost like a patch onto wet paper. Cauliflower gone. Okay, now I don't think this paper will be as easy. I got a little cauliflower here, so let's try to fix this little unevenness we got. I'm going to do the same thing on this student grade paper. Let's see how it does. Oh, it's reactivating pretty nicely. If I scrub it this too much though, the paper will get damaged and we won't be able to paint on it. So just be so gentle with your student grade paper. All right. So that worked. I mean, that smoothed that out. Let's see if we can smooth some of this out. It's perfectly dry. This cauliflower is not bad. This paper was hard to get it to cauliflower for whatever reason. And that's watercolor for you folks. What works on one paper will not work on another. All right, so that's a little bit more even now. Let's get some watery cobalt blue now and just float over the whole thing evenly. And that kind of evened that out, okay? And this evened out better than I really thought it would. I don't want to even that out. I like the cauliflower look in this tree. But look, what if you have this tree and it's too bright and it's supposed to be in the background and you need to push it back? Often cool colors will push things back into the background. So if you need to quiet this tree down in your painting, what you can do is just put a glaze, a very watery, cool over it. Doesn't really matter exactly what color, but I've got blue purple here. And look, this is perfectly dry. I can push that back into the background and make it quieter. So you can do that in shadow areas, in backgrounds. That softens the whole thing and makes it look like it's soft focus like it would be in the background. And say you have more painting down here in the foreground and that pushes that back. So you can paint things, let them dry, and then paint glazes over them to make changes, push them back in the background, or quiet them down, gray them down. Or I could have done a wash of hot pink and brought it forward. So you can work in layers like that, in really delicate layers. That's why it's smart for your first layers, to make them add plenty of water to your paint and make them lighter, because you can let them dry and then paint on top of them to continue to build darks. What if I wanted to make this tree dark? It's already half dry. Wow. Let's see if we can just, while it's still wet, we can drop in another series of color on top of the tree. Or if it was cat fur, I talked about this a lot in my newest tutorial of a cat. You know, you can punch up colors. What if I want to make it more hot and make it really come forward? I can get me some red and make it still, I'm going to make it plenty watery. And then I want to soften all that, right? So I'm going to just spritz at it a little and maybe let it run so it looks more random and mixes together on the page. So you can do that. You can build up color and texture and value with layers like that. Okay, I'm going to let all this dry, and then I want to show you some of my favorite fixing techniques when things are dry. All right, let's say we want to erase this. Say this is like a little snout coming off the end of this and we want to totally erase it. Let's try first with a soft scrubber and see what happens. I've got my soft eradicator. It doesn't do much on this arch. It's not really doing the job. So I'm going to get my Royal & Langnickel Zen size 8 stiff scrubber. I'm going to dip it in water. This is perfectly dry and set. Look how much I was able to erase. I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to see if we can repaint over this section and see if it will take paint. Let's try the same thing over here. I'm going to aggressively scrub it with a stiff scrubber. Actually, let's do the soft scrubber first. This paper might not need such stiff scrubbing, surprisingly enough. But you can see it's starting to pill up, right? It's not taking kindly to being scrubbed, and it's pilling up. Pieces of the paper are coming up, and I will be surprised if I can paint over that without it looking bad. Let's try erasing this little with a stiff scrubber. I'm going to scrub it I'm going to be cruel. And look, I mean, all that paper came up, right? Now, we need to let that completely dry before we paint back on that. So I'm going to let it completely dry, and then we'll try painting on it again and just see what happens. All right, now let's just see what happens when we try to paint on this damaged surface, just to illustrate what you'll be up against. Wow, I'm surprised it takes it that well. So it's letting me have some edges. That's interesting. All right, let's try on this. Definitely can paint on the arch and be able to have some control. That's really kind of surprises me that that looks like that. In a more nuanced painting situation, it might be difficult to get like blends, and I don't know. It's hard to paint on paper that's this damaged. Now I'll show you some dry fixing techniques. When everything's dry, say you have a hard edge here, say this is like the edge of a child's face and you want it softer. I do this all the time. I just soften, and I'll rub my brush over in this area to redistribute the paint that I've loosened. But see, you can really make a nice soft edge, even on this Canson paper if you're using a delicate edge. Say I wanted to soften this edge. This has gotten quite rough. Actually, I need a stiff scrubber. I'm going to use my smaller size 2 stiff scrubber. You need more coffee, honey? See, I evened out that edge a little bit. And I was able to fix a lot after it was completely dry. Let's use a more real world example like this tree. Say we forgot to leave little spaces of empty tree and we want to put some branches in. Let's lift out softly and gently a couple holes in the tree. Right? And then we'll let that completely dry, and then we can paint some branches in here. And I'm going to get some burnt sienna, and I'll show you just basically how I put a light layer down on this branch, right? And we can use our texture technique over that to kind of add tree texture to one side of the tree. So it's lit from this side's the dark side. And we can put in some branches. Say you put that in, you don't like it. I don't know if I like that. So I'm gonna flood it with water. I don't like that. I'm gonna take it back out. And then while it's still wet, you can add, you can add some green back in. Yep, never happened. Hated that. That's called the push and pull of painting. You put something down, see if you like it. I didn't like the branches. I took them back out. Also, I feel like this is too wide here. It's kind of bugging me. Like, this is what I do. Like, things bug me and I just start futzing. And I just feel like my tree's a little too wide, so I'm going to take out some of the edge. All right, thank you so much for watching this video. Now we're going to switch over to Rachel from a few days ago, and she's going to tell you all about my paid options. Here we go. For those of you who are interested in knowing more about my paid tutorials, I'll tell you about my Patreon. What Patreon was designed to do by Patreon's founders was to give artists a place where they could get the support they need financially so they could do what they love to do. Especially in today's world of AI, I used to make most of my money on Etsy selling prints and art, but now Etsy and Facebook is deluged by artificial intelligence art that looks real. It's really convincing. So that means a lot less prints sell now, a lot less originals sell now, because there's so much more competition online these days, and it's getting harder and harder for an online artist, at least, to make a living. So Patreon, the founders of Patreon saw that trend happening to artists and wanted them to have something where their members, their followers, fans, I don't feel comfortable calling my followers fans, it's my members, not even students, because I learn from my students, but it's a place where you can financially support me. But as most Patreon content providers do, you get something back for your money, which is tutorials. You get access, in fact, to a library of almost 200 real-time, start-to-finish tutorials. Many of them are super in-depth, like what I explained with my sailboats, with extra demonstrations. They're at the level of a course, but for just a low $9 or $13 a month, you get access to almost 200. If you join for a year, you get 2 months free. You pay for 10 months and you get 2 months free. And you can send me through email a painting of yours and get a critique. And so if you join at the $30 tier, you get even more critiques. If you join at the $9 tier, you get like a little less critiques. So it just depends on your tier, and you just read through the different options and you'll see. But I would love for you to join a paid tier on my Patreon at patreon.com/RachelStudio. But at the very least, be sure to join as a free member so you just stay in touch with me. It's almost like being on my mailing list. I send out several emails a week of tips and what I'm painting and what I'm working on, what I'm excited about, what shows I'm entering, and what you could enter if you're interested. Just fun art news, and we have a lot of fun. So I hope you'll join me there. But if not, at least be sure to join for free and join my Facebook group for free. And I hope to see a lot more of you online. Leave me a comment. Go binge a bunch of my other videos. I will leave a list of highly binge-worthy videos in the comments, and links to my supplies can be found at rachelstudio.com/supply list. And I also have some of my supplies in the description, along with tons of free tutorials, free things. Look through my description, look through my Patreon. It's like a watercolor playground in those places. So I hope you'll join me and come play. And until next time, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.